When we think about what it means to be good in this world, we often imagine that kindness and honesty will be rewarded, that purity of heart is something to be celebrated. But what if the opposite is true? What if, in a world built on cynicism and calculation, being too good is not just a disadvantage, but a fatal mistake? This is the uncomfortable question Dostoevsky throws at us in his novel, The Idiot. He doesn't offer us a comforting story about virtue triumphing over evil. Instead, he gives us Prince Myshkin, a man of absolute kindness, a soul so pure that he seems almost out of place in the world around him. Mishkin doesn't lie, he doesn't manipulate, he doesn't play the games that everyone else seems to accept as necessary for survival. And for this, he isn't admired. He's crushed. His purity, far from being celebrated, becomes a problem for those around him, a mirror that reflects back their own compromises and cynicism. So, we're left with a haunting question. If being pure means being destroyed, who is truly at fault? Is it the individual who refuses to adapt? Or is it the society that cannot tolerate someone who refuses to play by its rules? In this video, we're going to explore the many layers of The Idiot, not just as a story about one man, but as a merciless critique of society itself. We'll look at how Dostoevsky exposes the cost of goodness, the psychological depth of his characters, and the uncomfortable truths that still resonate today. And as we move deeper, we'll see that the real story isn't just about Mishkin, but about all of us and the world we've built together. As we step into the world of The Idiot, it quickly becomes clear that Mishkin's greatest flaw, at least in the eyes of those around him, is his refusal to participate in the games everyone else takes for granted. He doesn't lie to protect himself, doesn't manipulate to get ahead, and never uses another person's weakness for his own gain. In a society where everyone is constantly calculating, weighing their words, and strategizing their next move, Mishkin's openness is not seen as refreshing. It's seen as dangerous. People don't know what to do with someone who simply refuses to play by the rules. Instead of being admired for his honesty, he's treated with suspicion, even contempt. His sincerity unsettles those who have long since learned to hide their true selves behind masks of irony and self-interest. It's almost as if Mishkin's presence exposes a kind of collective discomfort. He becomes a living reminder of what others have lost or given up in order to survive. In a world that rewards cunning, his righteousness is not just out of place, it's a threat. The people around him, whether consciously or not, begin to see him as a problem that needs to be solved, not a hero to be celebrated. His kindness is interpreted as naivety, his trust as foolishness, and his refusal to manipulate as a lack of intelligence. The more he insists on acting with integrity, the more isolated he becomes. This dynamic forces us to confront a difficult truth about the world Dostoevsky is showing us. A world that, in many ways, still resembles our own. If society punishes purity, if it treats honesty and kindness as weaknesses rather than strengths, then what does it truly value? What are the real standards for survival? And what does that say about the kind of world we've created for ourselves? As we move forward, we have to ask, if purity is a problem, what does that reveal about the society that rejects it? Dostoevsky doesn't write to reassure us or to offer the comfort of easy answers. Instead, he holds up a mirror to society, a mirror that is anything but flattering. In The Idiot, he exposes the decay of the human soul, the compromises we make, and the moral dilemmas that define our existence. There's no attempt to soften the blow or to hide the uncomfortable truths. Dostoevsky's words are sharp, almost surgical, cutting through the layers of self-deception that we so often use to shield ourselves from reality. He doesn't want us to feel safe. He wants us to feel the weight of existence, to confront the questions we'd rather avoid. Unlike many writers who try to provide answers or offer a sense of closure, Dostoevsky is relentless in his refusal to make things easy for the reader. He doesn't wrap his stories in neat resolutions or comforting morals. Instead, he lays bare the contradictions and the pain, forcing us to look at the wounds we'd rather leave untouched. His novels are not fairy tales. They are autopsies of the human condition, exposing the rot beneath the surface. In The Idiot, this approach is especially stark. Mishkin's suffering is not just personal. It's a reflection of a society that cannot tolerate what it claims to admire. This is what makes Dostoyevsky's work so timeless and so unsettling. He doesn't just describe a world in crisis. He makes us feel it, makes us question our own place within it. And as we look more closely at Mishkin, we begin to see that he is not simply a naive hero, but something far more complex. A phenomenon that demands to be studied, not just admired. This deeper examination of Mishkin's role in the story opens up even more difficult questions about the nature of goodness and the cost of authenticity. Imagine for a moment that you could take a person of absolute goodness, someone who is incapable of deceit, who responds to cruelty with compassion, who sees the world with clear, uncorrupted eyes, and place them right in the center of a society built on self-interest and suspicion. This is the experiment Dostoyevsky conducts with Prince Myshkin. Mishkin is not just a character, he's a test case, a living question mark. What happens when someone so pure is thrown into a world that doesn't know what to do with him? The answer, as Dostoyevsky shows us, is not a happy one. There's no romanticism in Mishkin's journey, no cheap hope that his goodness will eventually win people over or transform the world around him. Instead, his authenticity is met with confusion, ridicule, and ultimately, rejection. The people he encounters are fascinated by him, even drawn to him, but they cannot accept him. His refusal to play by the rules makes him an anomaly, a disruption to the social order. Rather than being rewarded for his integrity, Mishkin is punished for it. His presence forces others to confront their own compromises, and that is something most people would rather avoid. In Dostoyevsky's hands, the fate of absolute goodness is not triumph, but tragedy. What makes Dostoyevsky's portrayal of Mishkin so compelling is not just the social experiment he sets in motion, but the psychological depth with which he draws his characters. Mishkin's goodness isn't the result of ignorance or childish innocence. It's not that he doesn't see the world's darkness. He sees it all too clearly. His kindness is a genuine impulse, something that comes from deep within, not from a lack of understanding, but from a conscious refusal to be corrupted. Dostoyevsky gives us a protagonist who is fully aware of the games people play, the lies they tell, and the masks they wear. Mishkin simply chooses not to participate, even when he knows it will cost him dearly. This psychological realism is one of Dostoyevsky's greatest strengths. Long before Freud or Jung, he was exploring the hidden layers of the human mind, the conflicts and contradictions that drive us. His characters are never one-dimensional. They are torn between desire and duty, fear and hope, love and resentment. In The Idiot, we see this most clearly in Mishkin, whose actions are guided not by logic or calculation, but by an inner necessity to remain true to himself. He's not a fool, but a man who cannot betray his own nature, no matter how much it hurts him. Dostoyevsky's insight into the human psyche anticipated many of the ideas that would later become central to psychoanalysis. He understood that people are not always rational, that we are often driven by forces we barely comprehend. But he also knew that these inner struggles don't happen in a vacuum. The mind is shaped by the world around it, by the pressures and expectations of society. And so, to truly understand Mishkin and ourselves, we have to look beyond psychology alone and consider the social context in which these dramas unfold. When someone refuses to conform, society rarely responds with curiosity or admiration. Instead, there's a familiar sequence that unfolds, a kind of social immune response. At first, people try to fix the nonconformist, to nudge them back into line, as if their refusal to play by the rules is just a misunderstanding or a phase. When that doesn't work, the next step is ridicule, mocking the person, labeling them as naive, foolish, or out of touch. If even that fails to bring them into conformity, The final stage is often exclusion or outright elimination. The person becomes a problem that must be removed, not because they are dangerous in any traditional sense, but because their very existence is unsettling. This is exactly what happens to Mishkin. His presence is not inspiring to those around him. It's threatening. He doesn't just refuse to play the game. He exposes the game itself. By acting with honesty and compassion, he forces others to confront the ways they have compromised, the small betrayals and rationalizations that have become part of their daily lives. Mishkin is a mirror, and what he reflects is uncomfortable. People don't want to be reminded of what they've lost or given up in order to survive. So instead of embracing his example, they turn against him. His purity is not seen as a virtue, but as a challenge to the social order, something that must be neutralized. What's striking is how universal this pattern is. It's not just a quirk of Dostoyevsky's fictional world. It's something we see again and again in real life. Whenever someone refuses to conform, to hide their true self, or to play along with the unspoken rules, the reaction is almost always the same. The mechanisms of rejection are deeply ingrained, and they reveal as much about society as they do about the individual who stands apart. If we look beyond the pages of Dostoevsky's novel, it's impossible not to see echoes of Mishkin's fate in our own world. In the workplace, those who refuse to play office politics or manipulate their way up the ladder are often sidelined, dismissed as lacking ambition or even as obstacles to progress. In relationships, people who show vulnerability and emotional honesty can quickly find themselves taken for granted or, worse, seen as weak. And in politics, sincerity is almost always overshadowed by strategy and spin. Those who speak the truth without filters rarely last long in the public arena. The lesson seems clear. The world still rewards cunning over kindness, calculation over transparency. This creates a painful dilemma for anyone who wants to live authentically. Is kindness a mistake? A naive misstep in a world that values self-preservation above all else? Or is it, in fact, an act of resistance? A refusal to let cynicism dictate the terms of our lives? Every time someone chooses honesty over manipulation, they challenge the system, even if the cost is isolation or ridicule. The question isn't just about one man in a Russian novel. It's about all of us and the choices we make every day. To truly understand why this dynamic persists and why it feels so timeless, we need to look back at the world Dostoevsky was writing about. The historical context of The Idiot reveals even more about the roots of this conflict between purity and survival. For this, we have to step back into 19th century Russia, a society caught in the throes of profound change. This was a time when the old certainties were crumbling. The aristocracy, once unchallenged in its authority, was losing its grip, while new social classes and revolutionary ideas were beginning to take root. The Orthodox faith, which had long been the backbone of Russian identity, was being questioned by waves of skepticism and nihilism. People were torn between the comfort of tradition and the uncertainty of modernity, between faith and the growing allure of disbelief. It was a society in crisis, unsure of what to hold on to and what to let go. In this turbulent landscape, Mishkin stands out as a figure from another era. He embodies a kind of Christian kindness and humility that, to many of his contemporaries, already seems outdated. His values are not just out of fashion, they're almost incomprehensible. Mishkin is an anachronism, a gentle soul adrift in a world that no longer has patience for his kind of goodness. He doesn't fit into the new order that's emerging, nor does he belong to the old one that's fading away. His very presence is a reminder of what's being lost, and for that, he's treated as an aberration. What we see in Dostoevsky's Russia is not just a local crisis, but a universal pattern that repeats itself whenever societies undergo profound change. Whenever old values are challenged by new ideologies, those who cling to integrity and authenticity often find themselves pushed to the margins. The rejection of purity isn't just a Russian story, it's a human one. Whether it's the Industrial Revolution, the fall of empires, or the rise of new political systems, history is full of moments when the rules of the game are rewritten and those who refuse to adapt are left behind. In these moments, the world seems to ask a brutal question. What matters more, staying true to yourself or surviving by any means necessary? This is the central dilemma that the idiot forces us to confront. Is it better to hold on to your integrity, even if it means being isolated or destroyed? Or is adaptation the higher virtue, the ability to bend and change in order to survive? It's a question that goes far beyond social customs or political systems. It cuts to the heart of what it means to be human. Are we defined by our principles or by our ability to fit in? Is the cost of authenticity too high, or is the price of conformity even greater? But this isn't just a social question. It's also deeply existential and psychological. The struggle between integrity and adaptation plays out not only in the world around us, but within our own minds and hearts, shaping the way we see ourselves and our place in the world. At the very heart of Mishkin's character lies a paradox that continues to fascinate and disturb us. Is he truly naive, unable to grasp the complexities and dangers of the world around him? Or is he, in fact, the most lucid person in the room, someone who sees reality with a clarity that others have lost? On the surface, it's easy to dismiss Mishkin as weak, as someone who simply can't cope with the demands of society. But if we look closer, we see that his refusal to play the game is not a sign of ignorance or fragility. It's a conscious choice, a kind of strength that most people can't even imagine. What makes Mishkin unbearable to those around him isn't his lack of intelligence. In fact, he understands the rules of the social game all too well. He just refuses to accept them as inevitable. His honesty, his emotional transparency, his unwillingness to manipulate or deceive. These are not the traits of a fool, but of someone who has chosen a different path. And it's precisely this clarity, this relentless authenticity, that makes others so uncomfortable. Mishkin exposes the compromises and self-deceptions that everyone else relies on to get by. He is a living challenge to the idea that cynicism is the only way to survive. This paradox of being both vulnerable and unbreakable, both innocent and deeply aware, gives Mishkin's story a resonance that goes beyond the personal. It brings us to the novel's messianic undertones, where the fate of absolute goodness takes on a larger, almost mythic significance. When we look at Mishkin through the lens of literature and history, it's impossible not to see echoes of Christ-like figures in his story. He offers unconditional kindness, forgives those who wrong him, and never retaliates, no matter how much he is hurt or betrayed. His goodness is not performative. It's not a strategy or a way to win favor. It's simply who he is. And yet, just like the great martyrs and prophets of the past, Mishkin is condemned for his purity. The world does not know what to do with someone who refuses to hate, who refuses to play by the rules of power and self-interest. Instead of being celebrated, he is pushed aside, ridiculed, and ultimately destroyed. But there's a crucial difference between Mishkin and the traditional image of the martyr. Mishkin does not seek out suffering or sacrifice. He doesn't want to be a savior or a symbol. He simply lives according to his own nature, without realizing that this alone is a challenge to the entire structure of society. His existence is a silent protest, a living question mark that unsettles everyone around him. He doesn't preach or condemn. He just is. And that, in a world built on compromise and calculation, is enough to make him a target. This brings us to the novel's final, most unsettling questions. Questions that go beyond the fate of one man and force us to confront the values and contradictions of our own world. Even now, more than a century after Dostoyevsky wrote The Idiot, the questions he raises remain disturbingly relevant. We still live in a world where cunning is often rewarded more than honesty, where those who know how to manipulate the system are celebrated, and those who insist on transparency are seen as naive or even dangerous. In our workplaces, our politics, and even our personal relationships, The rules haven't changed as much as we might like to think. The social game is still very much alive, and those who refuse to play it are often left behind. This forces us to ask, is absolute goodness even possible in a world like this? Or is corruption, in some form, simply inevitable? Are we doomed to repeat the same patterns, punishing those who dare to be authentic while rewarding those who adapt, no matter the cost to their integrity? These are not easy questions, and Dostoyevsky never pretends that they are. He doesn't offer us a solution or a comforting moral. Instead, he holds up a mirror and asks us to look at ourselves, at the ways we justify our own compromises, at the values we claim to hold versus the ones we actually live by. So, as we reach the end of this journey through Dostoyevsky's The Idiot, we're left with a central irony that's hard to ignore. Maybe the real idiot isn't Mishkin at all, but those who accept the rules of a corrupt game without ever questioning them. Maybe the true foolishness lies in believing that survival is only possible through compromise, that authenticity is a luxury we can't afford. Dostoyevsky's novel doesn't just tell the story of one man's downfall. It holds up a mirror to each of us, asking whether we would have the courage to stand apart, or whether we'd be among those who quietly go along. It's a question that lingers long after the final page. Is it worse to be rejected for being pure, or accepted for having been corrupted? Would we rather risk isolation for the sake of our integrity, or blend in and lose a part of ourselves in the process? Dostoyevsky's challenge is simple, but profound. What kind of person do you want to be? And what kind of world do you want to help build?